Good morning, brothers and sisters. Zechariah 12:2-3 says this, "Behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples all around. Now, the one in siege against Jerusalem will also be against Judah, but it will be in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who heave it up will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it." In verse 2, the prophet began to describe the final battle of the ages, the Battle of Armageddon, when a global military force will come against the small, beleaguered nation of Israel. Though this siege will be unlike any other conflagration in history, Zechariah first focused not upon the horrors of this battle, but upon God's planned and ordained outcome. With the words, "Behold, I am going to make," the Lord declared that his sovereign hand would be in control over this climactic conflict. The verb make denotes setting or establishing. It depicts how God will definitively orchestrate these circumstances to bring judgment to the nations and salvation to Israel. At the apex of the battle, God will make Jerusalem the main target of the enemy's assault, a cup that causes reeling. The word cup is not the usual word for cup, but refers to a large basin from which many people could drink. Such vessels were prominent in the temple. In this future global assault, the nations will target Jerusalem, viewing it as a large and inviting cup from which they could indulge their thirst for violence and death and power. Instead, when they attack Jerusalem, they will drink deeply of God's wrath, resulting not in revelry, but in reeling. They will stagger about as if in a drunken stupor, unable to defend themselves against divine retribution. This will happen to all the peoples all around who are attacking Israel. God will incapacitate every enemy, all from every nation, peoples, no matter their strategy of attack, all around. The Lord then elaborated that this intervention will not only be for Jerusalem, but for all his people. In the final battle, the enemy's attack will not be limited to Jerusalem. The Lord explained that the one in siege against Jerusalem will also be against Judah. The war will rage across the nation with Jerusalem as its main objective. Accordingly, God's victory for Jerusalem will mean deliverance for the entire nation. When the Lord intervenes, the turnaround for Jerusalem will be stunning. God further declared, "But it will be in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples." This is the first of many times the phrase, "in that day," occurs in this chapter. In repeating this language, Zechariah joined his predecessors in painting a composite picture of the day of the Lord, the time surrounding Christ's return, when Yahweh will reveal himself to judge his enemies and save his people. The phrase "in that day" served as a reminder that despite the horrors of Armageddon, the Lord will appear in triumph and glory. At that point, God will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. The text already mentioned that Jerusalem will be a cup that causes reeling, verse 2. And now Zechariah added that Jerusalem will be a heavy stone. This metaphor characterized Jerusalem as a cumbersome and crushing weight, illustrating the devastating power of God that will destroy Israel's attacking enemies. In ancient times, heavy stones were used for physical conditioning. There were even weightlifting contests involving large boulders. The weak could be crushed under the weight, resulting in serious injury or even death. Such heavy stones illustrate what Jerusalem will be like for all the peoples who attempt to destroy her. Thinking they are strong enough to gain victory, Israel's enemies will discover that the power of Israel's sovereign defender will crush them. In the next statement, the Lord said that all who heave it up will be severely injured. The word heave shares the same Hebrew root as the word heavy used above. Israel's enemies will heave with all their might, but Israel's capital city will be too heavy, and they will be severely injured beneath its weight. The term injured was used in Leviticus 21 verse 5 to describe cuts or lacerations in the flesh, and its use here carries that idea. No nation will be able to overpower Israel, but rather all the enemies will be eviscerated under the crushing weight of divine judgment. For the people of Israel, the strength to defeat their enemies will come not from the power of the city, but from the Lord. As Yahweh said at the beginning of the verse, I will make. He and He alone is responsible for the stunning triumph. That the Lord is emphatic that His victory on that day will be truly comprehensive is stated clearly. All the nations of the earth will be gathered against Israel. The enemy will represent a global force, coming from every direction. From the west, there will be the revived Roman Empire, as well as nations as far as Tarshish, which is part of Spain. There will also be countries from the remotest part of the north as well as the south and the east. As described in the book of Revelation, there will be a global military, an army numbering in the hundreds of millions, that will assemble at the plain of Megiddo in the northern region of Israel. They will engage in a battle that rages across the length of Israel, spreading over a 200-mile range. The blood that is spilled will splatter as high as the horses' bridles. As this text states, the nations will be gathered by God Himself against Jerusalem and the surrounding regions. Though there is a sense in which Satan will gather his army, God ultimately orchestrates it all. The Lord declared in Zechariah 14 verse 2, Indeed, I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. What appears to be a satanic plot against God and the chosen people will in fact set the stage for God to secure Israel's ultimate triumph. Zechariah 12, 4-5 says, In that day, declares Yahweh, I will strike every horse with bewilderment and his rider with madness. But I will open my eyes to watch over the house of Judah while I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah will say in their hearts, A strong support for us are the inhabitants of Jerusalem through Yahweh of hosts, their God. With the phrase in that day, the Lord revealed additional details about how He will achieve victory for Israel, a triumph that Yahweh Himself declares will take place. When Israel's enemies attack Jerusalem, the Lord will act decisively to disable them. As He said, I will strike every horse with bewilderment and his rider with madness. Once again, with the words, I will strike, Yahweh reminded His people that He is the one driving this action forward. He will meet Israel's enemies with devastating power and strike every horse with bewilderment. Now, the horse is symbolic of the strength of one's military resources. In ancient times, horses were a swift, lethal force in battle. In the future, the Lord will cause the technology and weaponry of Satan's forces to be bewildered, ineffective, immobilized, and useless. God will not only damage every enemy weapon, but will also strike the soldiers, represented by His rider, with madness. In addition to debilitating the enemy's military equipment, the Lord will disorientate the soldiers, rendering them ineffective. Thus, He will deal with the totality of the enemy's forces. Madness describes fury or recklessness, and was used of Jehu driving his chariot like a maniac. Within a military unit, soldiers who acted wildly or irrationally obviously created disorder and chaos. In the Battle of Armageddon, the weapons of war will fail and the soldiers who operate them will panic. In Deuteronomy 28:28, the Lord threatened to curse the Israelites with madness and bewilderment if they did not obey him. At Armageddon, God will take the curse and put it on Israel's adversaries. There were other times in Israel's history when God caused the enemy to be confused, but this will be on a scale never seen before, sending the enemy force into self-destructive chaos. While the enemy forces are reeling, Yahweh will open his eyes to watch over the house of Judah. God will not be swept away in the pandemonium of the battle. Rather, he will engage with open eyes, diligently scrutinizing the house of Judah. As noted, the house of Judah referred to the leadership of Israel. Though the enemy will be disabled, being consumed by confusion, Israel's leaders will be led by God and empowered to direct the nation to victory. In further detail of his judgment, the Lord will strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. In biblical history, God used blindness to debilitate people and to overcome militaries. In this prophecy of the conflict called the Battle of Armageddon, God declared that he will blind the horses. The first part of verse 4 indicated that the horses will be bewildered. Now, Zechariah revealed the reason for their panic. They will not be able to see. While the eyes of the Lord will be open toward Judah, Yahweh will shut the eyes of the enemy. This contrast is amplified by the structure of the verse. The first and last parts of verse 4 concern Israel's enemies, while God's care for Judah is expressed in the middle. That layout depicts Judah surrounded by her enemies and God in the midst of his people protecting them. When the Lord confounds Israel's enemies and protects his people, they will respond in praise. God continued, "The clans of Judah will say in their hearts, 'A strong support for us are the inhabitants of Jerusalem through Yahweh of hosts, their God.'" The designation, clans of Judah, refers to the major regiments of Israel's military. The Lord's countermeasures of blinding and bewildering the enemy will embolden his people in battle. They will be encouraged in their hearts to know that there is strong support for them, denoting both the courage to stand and the strength to overcome. The regiments of Judah will be greatly strengthened by the victory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, recognizing that the triumph in the capital city will turn the tide of the entire battle. They will rightly understand that Jerusalem's success comes entirely through Yahweh of hosts, their God. Yahweh of hosts, Zechariah's favorite title for God, expresses that Yahweh deploys all his heavenly resources to defend his people. Upon seeing God fight for them, the people of Israel will confess boldly that Yahweh is their God. In conclusion, as the clans of Judah declare these truths in their hearts, they will reflect the transforming work of God within them. While this will be discussed in greater detail in Zechariah 12 through 13, this expression denotes how transformative Yahweh's work for his people will be. God's deliverance will be so mighty that it will not only overcome the nation's enemies, but even Israel's own unbelief and sinfulness. While God will blind Israel's foes, he will open the eyes of his people, so they will call upon him in saving faith.